3068. Unless otherwise specified, Federal Airways include that Class E airspace extending upward from A. 700 feet above the surface up to and including 17,999 feet MSL. B. 1,200 feet above the surface up to and including 17,999 feet MSL. C. The surface up to and including 18,000 feet MSL. Federal Airways are part of Class B, C, D, or E airspace. The correct answer is B. Federal Airways, also known as Victor Airways, are designated routes for instrument flight rules, IFR, traffic. These airways are part of the National Airspace System and provide a structured system for IFR flights. Unless otherwise specified, Class E airspace extends upward from 1,200 feet above the surface up to and including 17,999 feet mean sea level, MSL. This means that Federal Airways, which are within Class E airspace, also follow this vertical extent. The correct answer is 1,200 feet above the surface up to and including 17,999 feet MSL, as specified in the question. This indicates that Federal Airways include Class E airspace starting at 1,200 feet above the surface and extending up to 17,999 feet MSL. It's important to note that Class B, C, D, or E airspace can be associated with Federal Airways depending on the specific route and location, as mentioned in the incorrect option C. However, the vertical extent of Federal Airways themselves falls within Class E airspace. 3068-1. With certain exceptions, Class E airspace extends upward from either 700 feet or 1,200 feet AGL2, but not include A. 10,000 feet MSL. B. 14,500 feet MSL. C. 18,000 feet MSL. The correct answer is C. Class E airspace is controlled airspace that extends upward from a specified altitude or designated surface area. With certain exceptions, Class E airspace extends upward from either 700 feet or 1,200 feet above ground level, AGL, 2, but not including 18,000 feet mean sea level, MSL. The correct answer is 18,000 feet, MSL. This means that Class E airspace starts either at 700 feet AGL or 1,200 feet AGL and extends upward until it reaches 18,000 feet MSL. Above 18,000 feet MSL, other airspace classifications such as Class A, Class B, Class C, Class D, or Class G airspace apply. It's important to note that there are certain exceptions and variations in the vertical extent of Class E airspace in specific areas, such as around airports, along airways, and in controlled airspace surrounding instrument approach procedures. However, the general rule is that Class E airspace extends to 18,000 feet MSL unless otherwise specified. 3783. Under what condition, if any, may pilots fly through a restricted area? A. When flying on airways with an ATC clearance. B. With the controlling agency's authorization. C. Regulations do not allow this. The correct answer is B. Pilots may fly through a restricted area only with the authorization of the controlling agency. Restricted areas are designated airspace that contains unusual hazards to aircraft, such as artillery firing, aerial gunnery, or guided missiles. These areas are established to protect national security or for other reasons necessitating restrictions on aircraft operations. To ensure safety and compliance with regulations, pilots must obtain specific authorization from the controlling agency before entering a restricted area. This authorization is typically obtained through proper coordination and communication with the appropriate military or controlling authority responsible for the restricted area. It is important for pilots to adhere to the regulations and obtain the necessary authorization when operating near or through restricted areas to avoid potential hazards and ensure the overall safety of their flight. Q3783-1. Flight through a restricted area should not be accomplished unless the pilot has A. Filed an IFR flight plan. B. Received prior authorization from the controlling agency. C. Received prior permission from the commanding officer of the nearest military base. The correct answer is B. Flight through a restricted area should not be accomplished unless the pilot has received prior authorization from the controlling agency. Restricted areas are designated airspace with specific restrictions and potential hazards to aircraft, such as artillery firing, aerial gunnery, or guided missiles. These areas are established for reasons of national security or other operational requirements. To ensure the safety and integrity of the airspace, pilots must obtain authorization from the controlling agency responsible for the restricted area before entering it. This authorization is typically obtained through proper coordination and communication with the appropriate military or controlling authority. Filing an IFR flight plan may be required for instrument flight in certain airspace, but it does not guarantee authorization to fly through a restricted area. Similarly, obtaining permission from the commanding officer of the nearest military base may not be sufficient without specific authorization from the controlling agency. Therefore, the correct answer is received prior authorization from the controlling agency. Pilots should follow the proper procedures and obtain the necessary authorization to ensure safe and lawful flight through restricted areas. 3785. What action should a pilot take when operating under VFR in a military operations area, MOA? A. Obtain a clearance from the controlling agency prior to entering the MOA. B. Operate only on the airways that traverse the MOA. C. Exercise extreme caution when military activity is being conducted. The correct answer is C. When operating under Visual Flight Rules, VFR, in a military operations area, MOA, the pilot should exercise extreme caution when military activity is being conducted. MOAs are designated airspace where military training activities, such as aerobatics or aerial refueling, are conducted. These activities may involve high-speed aircraft or maneuvers that can create potential hazards to other aircraft. While it is not mandatory to obtain a clearance from the controlling agency prior to entering an MOA, it is highly recommended to contact the controlling agency or flight service station for information on the MOA's status and active military operations. This allows the pilot to be aware of any potential hazards and adjust their flight accordingly. Operating only on airways that traverse the MOA may not always be feasible or necessary for VFR flights. VFR flights have the flexibility to navigate outside of airways, but they should remain vigilant and avoid areas where military activities are taking place. Exercise extreme caution when military activity is being conducted. Pilots should be aware of MOAs and their route of flight, stay informed about any active military operations, and exercise caution to ensure safe separation from military aircraft and activities.